Somewhere in the Democratic Republic of Congo, right now, a child is digging with his bare hands. He's not digging for gold. He's not digging for diamonds. He's digging for cobalt, the metal sitting inside your phone, inside your laptop, inside the electric car parked outside a showroom in California or Berlin. Here's the part that should stop you. Almost 7 out of every 10 kilograms of cobalt mined on this planet come out of the ground in this one country. Not 2 or 3 countries. One.
And most people who plug in their phone tonight will never know that. So what's actually happening down there? Who controls it? And more importantly, why does almost nobody talk about it? Stick with me, because this isn't really a story about mining. It's a story about who gets to own the future and who gets left digging for it. Let's start with something familiar. You've probably heard the pitch. Electric cars are clean, solar panels are clean, batteries are the future, and the future doesn't burn oil. It's a good story. It's also incomplete. Because every one of those batteries needs raw material, cobalt, lithium, and most of it, for now, has to come from somewhere in the ground. For decades, somewhere in the ground in Africa meant gold, diamonds, rubber, copper. Empires came, took what they wanted, and left almost nothing behind. So when people started calling this new battery race a new scramble for Africa, it wasn't just a clever headline. It was a warning, a memory of a history nobody wants to repeat.
Now here's the mechanism nobody shows you. While the world was arguing about climate change, China was quietly building something far more valuable than an oil pipeline. Over 20 years, Chinese companies moved into Africa's cobalt and cobalt belts and locked in mining rights, one contract at a time. 2 names matter here: CMOC and Zijin Mining, massive Chinese firms that now hold some of the richest cobalt concessions on the continent, working alongside state-linked partners like the DRC's own mining company, Gécamines.
But mining was never really the prize. Refining was. Today, roughly 3/4 of the world's lithium gets chemically refined inside China. Cobalt refining is even more lopsided in China's favor. Think about what that means. Africa can dig the metal out of the ground, but almost nobody outside China can turn it into something a battery factory can actually use. That's not an accident. That's 20 years of strategy, executed while the rest of the world was still filling up at the gas station.
So where does that leave the West? Washington and Brussels woke up late, and once they realized how dependent their car industries had become on Chinese-controlled supply chains, the word de-risking started showing up in every policy paper written in either capital. The U.S. is now backing something called the Lobito Corridor, a rail line cutting straight across the continent, from the copper-cobalt belt to Angola's Atlantic coast, built specifically to avoid routes that pass through Chinese-controlled territory.
The EU has its own version, a program called Global Gateway, aimed at the same target. It sounds like infrastructure, it's actually a chess move. But here's where the story gets genuinely surprising, because the 2 superpowers aren't the ones writing all the rules anymore. In 2008, the DRC signed a massive deal, trading mineral rights to Chinese firms in exchange for roads, hospitals, and railways. For 15 years, that deal mostly stayed the way China wanted it. Then, in 2023, the Congolese government did something almost nobody expected. They went back to the table and forced a renegotiation, demanding better terms from one of the most powerful economies on Earth. Zimbabwe did something similar. Instead of letting foreign companies ship raw lithium rock out of the country, Zimbabwe simply banned it. If you want the lithium, you build the processing plant here, on our land, employing our people. That's not the colonial playbook. That's a country using the one form of leverage it actually has. Now, is this a happy ending? Not exactly. Because underneath the trade deals and the rail lines is a much harder reality. Much of the DRC's cobalt still comes out of the ground the same way it always has, dug by hand in unregulated pits by workers known locally as cruciers, diggers. No machinery, no real protection. Some of them are children.
And here's the part almost nobody tells you. That hand-dug cobalt doesn't stay separate from the industrial supply. It quietly blends into the same trucks, the same warehouses, the same export channels feeding the world's biggest car companies. So every blockchain tracking pledge, every ethically sourced label on a battery, it's running up against a supply chain that in practice is almost impossible to fully trace.
That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the clean energy story. The green future still runs, in part, through red dirt and bare hands. And it's not only cobalt pits. In the east of the DRC, armed groups still fight over territory rich in minerals, turning parts of the region into active conflict zones. In Zimbabwe's lithium fields, it's a different fight. Land disputes, water pollution, and a steady stream of ore that quietly disappears through smuggling routes before it ever reaches an official scale.
So, which version of this story is actually true? Some economists say this is the best thing that's happened to African bargaining power in a century, that having China, the US, and the EU all competing for the same minerals lets governments play one buyer against another and walk away with real infrastructure instead of empty promises. Others push back hard. Human rights researchers argue the opposite is happening, that with so many eager buyers willing to look past labor abuses just to secure supply, there's now less pressure on anyone to actually enforce the rules. And a third group rejects the whole framing. They say comparing this to 19th century colonialism is lazy history, that it erases the very real fact that sovereign African governments are the ones signing these deals, rewriting them, and banning exports on their own terms. Maybe all three are a little bit right. That tends to be how the messiest stories in the world actually work. And here's why this isn't just someone else's problem, happening somewhere far away. Think about the money first. If cobalt supply tightens because of conflict or new export restrictions or a diplomatic standoff between superpowers, the price of the battery in your next car goes up with it. So does the price of the phone in your pocket. Now think about the opportunity. If Western and allied nations succeed in building alternate supply routes, entirely new industries get created outside China's orbit. Refining jobs, engineering jobs, logistics jobs, some of them possibly closer to home than you'd expect.
And then there's security. Whoever controls the minerals that power modern batteries and modern militaries holds real leverage in any future conflict or standoff. That's not abstract. That's the kind of leverage that shapes wars before they start. If the West fails to catch up, the next decade of the global economy runs largely on terms written in Beijing. If African nations keep gaining leverage, an entirely new kind of economic power could emerge on the continent for the first time in generations.
This is one of those stories that looks distant until you check the price tag on your next phone, your next car, your next power bill. What do you think happens next? Do African nations keep gaining leverage, playing superpowers against each other to build real industries at home? Or does the pressure to move fast eventually crush the progress that's been made?
Because right now, honestly, both futures are still possible. There's no clean answer here. No villain wearing a black hat, no simple hero to root for. Just a continent, once treated as a place to take from, now sitting at the center of the decision that will shape the next 100 years of energy. The metal is still coming out of the ground the same way it always has, by hand, in the dark, one shovel at a time.
But for the first time in a very long time, the people standing on top of that ground have a real say in who gets to keep it. If you found this deep dive into the forces shaping our world worth your time, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one, hidden histories still being written right now underneath our feet.